Have you ever felt like your life was reduced to just taking care of what others leave behind? When someone looks at you and with a gentle smile says, "You're too old for this," as if age were a stamp that prevents you from dreaming, this is how, without realizing it, we are pushed to the background. They make us extras in our own story. That's exactly what she heard. "Grandma, you're too old for long flights. Will you take care of the house for us?" They said it so casually, as if it were a favor, as if it were obvious she'd stay behind. No one asked if she still wanted to be there. No one noticed the pain hidden in that smile that only waved. But there is a breaking point, a moment when silence weighs so heavily that it transforms into courage. And this courage doesn't come in shouts. It comes softly, but firmly, with the strength of someone who understands that it's never too late to start over. When she found those travel tickets in the mailbox, something changed. It was as if a door, previously locked for years of invisibility, finally opened. And for the first time in a long time, she saw herself as a whole person, not as a shadow of mere service. What happened next? Oh, you'll find out. But know this: never underestimate those who were left behind, because sometimes those who stay find freedom others never imagined. They arrived home with that hurried air, as if their minds were already elsewhere. They talked about the Greek beaches, the blue sea, the children who couldn't wait to board. And, amidst their enthusiasm, came the phrase that echoed, "You're too old for long flights, Grandma. Take care of the house for us, will you?" It sounded soft, but it carried the weight of a sentence. She smiled politely, but inside she felt that silent rejection that doesn't need shouting to hurt. It was as if the imposed loneliness were something natural, as if it were the fate of those who grow old, to be left behind, to be treated like a supporting character in their own family, a useful but invisible presence. At that moment, there was no protest, just a restrained wave as they watched the large black van drive away. They laughed loudly, chatting about fresh seafood without even looking back. No one noticed the stare out the window, the pain contained in the eyes of those who remained. And suddenly, the house felt too empty. The silence seemed to scream, reminding her that she hadn't been invited to join in the joy. Being left behind hurts more when it's disguised as care. Because it's not just family exclusion, it's the implicit message that her presence no longer matters. She looked at the plants she had to water, the doors she had to lock twice. It was as if her life consisted of keeping alive what others had left behind. In that moment, something inside her tightened. It wasn't just sadness, it was the beginning of something she couldn't yet name. It's funny how life sometimes pushes you aside, thinking you'll accept it quietly. She had been a mother, a wife, a nurse, a confidant. Now she was just the grandma who takes care of things. But there was one detail they forgot. Those who have lived so long carry a silent courage, dormant, but still there. And in that moment, as she closed the door behind them, she took a deep breath. He smelled the emptiness, the weight of invisibility, but also a barely perceptible flicker of freedom. She couldn't explain it yet, but something told her she wouldn't be trapped in that role for much longer. And that was the first crack in the old wall of submission. The next morning, as she sipped her tea slowly, she heard the soft sound of the mail. She wasn't expecting anything important, just bills or advertisements. But when she opened the box, she found a thick envelope, still bearing the travel agency's stamp. Inside were the tickets to Athens. 4 tickets, 2 adults, 2 children. Her name was nowhere to be found. She stared at those papers as if observing something that didn't belong to her. It was almost surreal to think they'd planned everything, agreed on every detail, and hadn't even considered including her. The family's exclusion was there, written in cold letters. It was more than invisibility. It was confirmation that, for them, she wasn't necessary. He held the tickets for a while without moving. He thought of the Greek beaches he'd dreamed of visiting when he was younger. She thought of her husband, Paul, who always said they'd go together one day. And now all that remained was the imposed loneliness of someone left to take care of the house. But something changed in that moment. With shaking hands, she didn't cry. She didn't make a fuss. She picked up the phone and, without hesitation, dialed the agency. Her voice was steady, almost strange to her. "I would like to cancel these tickets, please." On the other end of the line, the girl seemed confused, perhaps even scared. But she complied. Within minutes, whatever they had planned disappeared. When she hung up, she felt a different silence fill the room. It was no longer the silence of someone invisible. It was the silence of someone finally making an unexpected decision. Canceling the tickets wasn't revenge. It was just the first step toward breaking out of the invisible caretaker role they'd imposed on her. She placed the canceled tickets on the kitchen table and took a deep breath. Around her, everything seemed the same. The plants, the paintings, the clock showing the same time as always. But inside her, something was no longer the same. It was as if she had awakened from a long sleep, and for the first time in a long time, she asked herself, "What if I don't stay?" That question echoed like a spark igniting a flame. The pent-up pain began to transform into quiet courage, and that courage, she knew, would lead to a destiny no one could have imagined. After canceling the tickets, she sat in her favorite chair, the one where she had rocked her son to sleep many years ago. She looked around and saw the old portraits, especially the one of Paul, always smiling. If he had been there, she knew she wouldn't have let this happen. For a moment, her chest tightened, but then she took a deep breath. He opened the drawer where he kept his documents and found his passport. He ran his fingers over the weather-beaten blue cover and, to his surprise, saw that it was still valid. It felt like a sign. It was as if the world was silently telling him that there was still time to start over, even at 70. She thought about her bank account. She wasn't rich, but she had enough to support herself. No one else depended on her. For the first time in decades, she felt she had the autonomy to make decisions for herself. It was a liberating and frightening thought at the same time. He picked up the phone again, but this time, not to cancel, but to book. A one-way ticket to Athens, one seat only, no companions, no explanation. The attendant asked, "Are you sure, ma'am?" And she responded with a calm I had never felt before. "Yes, I have." Then he called Carol, his trusted neighbor. "He asked me to water the plants while he was away." "Are you going on a trip, dear?" Carol asked, curious. "Just a little trip," he replied, leaving a smile in the air that carried secrets. It was the first time he had made plans without asking permission. She packed a small suitcase, comfortable shoes, a navy blue scarf she hadn't worn since Paul's funeral, and a lipstick forgotten in the back of a drawer. She also wore a dress that made her feel elegant, even though she hadn't looked at herself that way in years. It was more than packing. It was preparing a new version of herself. The night before her flight, she sat on the porch. The wind blew softly, bringing a different, almost sweet silence. She wondered what they would say when they found out. Maybe they would call. Maybe they wouldn't. But for once, it didn't matter. She knew she was choosing herself. And this time, she wouldn't go back. On the day of her flight, she walked to the airport with her suitcase light and her heart beating differently. It was as if each step told her she wasn't just the grandmother left behind. In the check-in line, she felt the curious glances of younger people, as if wondering what a woman her age was doing there, alone. And she just smiled inwardly, without explaining. When the gate agent looked at the passport and then at her, he smiled in that polite way that young people have. "Have a good trip, ma'am." She didn't answer, just held the note like a shield. It was strange to be there after so many years without traveling, but at the same time, there was a peace that only those who choose to feel. On the plane, she sat in the aisle seat. While other passengers hurried past, stowing their luggage, she remained serene. She wanted no distractions, no conversations. She simply wanted to feel the moment. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, leaving behind all the imposed loneliness she carried in silence. Upon landing in Athens, the warmth enveloped her differently. The air seemed brighter, the sun closer. She took a simple taxi to a small guest house on a quiet street. Nothing fancy, but clean and welcoming. When the attendant called her, "Madam," with respect, she felt a gentle tug at her heart. It was like regaining a little piece of dignity she had forgotten. In the bedroom, he set his suitcase in the corner and sat on the edge of the bed. He didn't cry. He just stood there, staring at the tile floor, absorbing the weight of what he had done. It wasn't sadness. It was something deeper, a feeling of having silently broken the invisible chains of invisibility. That evening, she went for a slow walk through the ancient streets. She didn't go far, just a few blocks. She bought fresh bread and olives at a small bakery. She ate alone, unhurriedly, without checking her phone. No one was waiting for news. And curiously, this brought an unexpected lightness. The next day, when she opened the window, she saw the clear sky, and without thinking much, grabbed the lipstick she'd forgotten in her makeup bag. She applied just a little, almost as a gesture of respect to herself. It had been years since she'd allowed herself that kind of care. And in that moment, she felt she was beginning to reconnect with who she'd always been. Before she was just the grandmother who takes care of the house. It was one quiet morning, while sipping coffee at a small table near the window, that she first saw her. A woman about the same age, silver hair tied back in a tight bun, glasses perched delicately on her nose. There was something about the stranger's posture, something that conveyed effortless strength, and for a moment, they felt watched. Rosalie arrived with determined strides, ordered a coffee, and sat at the next table. She wasn't the type to make an effort to be noticed, but she inevitably drew attention. After a few minutes of silence, she looked down at her bread and butter and uttered a simple, almost funny sentence. "You're overdoing it with the butter." It was impossible not to laugh. After so long of silence, that little observation broke through the wall of isolation. She responded with a smile. "Better than underdoing it." And so, without much introduction, a light conversation began. Two women, two stories, united by something that needed no explanation. Rosalie was a widow, a former school principal, traveling alone after years of dedication to others. He had a dry wit and a quiet confidence, the kind of presence that doesn't weigh down. They talked about simple things, the weather, the pretty street, the cats sleeping in doorways, and for the first time, she felt a genuine connection with someone who also knew what it was like to be invisible, and yet choose to exist. In the following days, they began walking together. They avoided the famous tourist spots, preferring the quiet corners, the narrow streets filled with flowers, the little hidden cafes. Rosalie had a keen eye for details that others overlooked. A forgotten lilac vase in a windowsill, an old door ajar, a lazy cat perched on a low wall. And that made the world seem more beautiful. As they walked, they exchanged stories. They spoke of losses, of distant children, of postponed dreams. There was no judgment, just listening and understanding. It was an unexpected friendship, without demands, without labels, a true bond that emerged with the naturalness of someone who needs nothing to prove. With Rosalie, she realized that life could have a different rhythm. She no longer needed to chase acceptance or be useful to someone. She could simply exist, and in that simple, honest existence, she rediscovered a piece of herself that had lain dormant for decades. With Rosalie, the days began to take on a different glow. They decided to travel together, unhurriedly and without rigid plans. From Athens, they went to Florence, then Lisbon, Seville, and Granada. Each city brought a different color, sound, and smell, and in each one, she felt as if she were, little by little, dismantling the invisible bonds that kept her so small. In Florence, she stood silent before the birth of Venus, feeling something inexplicable inside her chest. It wasn't just beauty. It was a reminder that there was still life pulsing there, even after so long of feeling invisible. Rosalie noticed his fixed gaze and simply whispered, "You are remembering who you are." She just smiled, unable to explain. In Lisbon, sitting on a balcony, she heard a musician play fado. The melody seemed to speak of everything she'd never had the courage to say, a gentle sadness mixed with an ancient strength. There, she felt like she could cry, but she didn't. She simply let the music sink in, as if washing away the years of imposed solitude. Seville brought warmth, narrow streets, and the vibrant energy of flamenco dancing. She watched an older woman dancing with a strength that defied time. Each stamp of her foot on the ground said, "I'm still here," and for the first time in decades, she thought, "Me too." This feeling was new, almost uncomfortable, but deeply liberating. At each stop, she discovered little things she hadn't even noticed before. The taste of strong coffee, the wind ruffling her hair, the light weight of lipstick on her lips. These weren't grand gestures, but signs that she was returning to herself. It was as if each city opened a door within her, and behind each door lay a forgotten version, waiting to breathe. Rosalie said that growing old wasn't about losing, it was just exchanging haste for presence. And she understood that phrase more and more. She found herself laughing spontaneously, wanting to dance, to write in the notebook she bought in Lisbon, to record thoughts she'd never dared to say out loud. There, far from the pressures, without having to be just a mother or grandmother, she understood something simple. It wasn't too late. It's never too late to start over. Even at 70, she could still be the master of her own story. She could still choose. And that choice was the greatest gift she had ever given herself. While exploring the streets of Lisbon, her phone vibrated for the first time in days. It was a short message from her daughter-in-law. No affection, just a practical reminder. Have you checked the garden? The irrigation system is acting strange. There was no, "How are you?" much less a, "We miss you." Just the same old coldness, as if she were still just the invisible caregiver. Then came other messages, this time from his son. Curious at first, then insistent. "Mom, where are you? Everything is fine? Please call us." Each word seemed less like concern and more like discomfort at the realization that she was no longer where they expected her to be. She read it, but didn't respond. She felt that silence was necessary, almost pedagogical. Sometimes it's only when emptiness sets in that people begin to realize who's truly missing. And she, for the first time, allowed them to feel that absence. Not out of revenge, but to show that she was no longer a replaceable part. Among all the messages, one caught my attention. It was from my granddaughter. Unlike her parents, Amelia didn't insist on prep work. She simply wrote, "Grandma, where are you? I miss you." There was tenderness and empathy in those few words, a sincere, non-judgmental request. It was the only message that made her heart soften. Then he answered simply, "I'm traveling, my dear. Seeing the sea I've always dreamed of." She didn't explain anything else, didn't give details. She just made it clear that she was fine. It was a relief to know that, at least to her granddaughter, she was still seen as a person, not a function. The days went by. The family's messages became longer, more desperate. Her daughter-in-law sent audio messages, her son called non-stop, but she chose not to answer. She knew that, at that moment, any word from them would only be an attempt to bring her back to the same old place. And she had no intention of going back to being a supporting character in her own life. Deep down, he felt that silence was teaching him something. Sometimes you have to step back for people to see what they never noticed when you were always around. And as he drank coffee with Rosalie, he looked into the distance and realized that, this time, he would only respond to those who truly mattered. That night in Seville, she received another string of messages. Her son now sounded tired, almost anxious. "Mom, please call us. The kids are worried. We need to talk to you." But there was still no apology, just an attempt to bring her back to her usual role. She stared at her phone for long minutes. She didn't feel angry, nor sad. It was a different feeling, almost mature, of someone who finally understood her worth. Then she took a deep breath and, without rushing, opened the voice recorder. She didn't plan the words, just let them come from her heart. "David, I'm not angry, but I've changed. I spent my life waiting to be seen, and often I was just in the background. I love you, I always will, but I'm not going back to being the one waiting to be called." The voice came out calm, without tremors, full of a truth that didn't need shouting. He paused before continuing. "If you want me to be a part of your lives, it'll have to be in a different way. Not as the invisible caregiver, but as the whole person I've always been. I'm not too old to dream. I've just never been asked if I still dream." When she finished, she felt a slight, almost sweet relief. It was like lifting an old stone from her chest. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't punishment. It was simply a silent affirmation of someone who had decided to exist for herself. She pressed send and put her phone back in her bag, not expecting an immediate response. Afterwards, he walked with Rosalie through the illuminated streets. He spoke of the sound of flamenco dancers, of the warmth that seemed to embrace the ancient stones. And he realized that life went on, even without answers from his family. Because in that moment, she had already chosen herself. As the music echoed in the distance, she realized that the audio wasn't just a message to her son. It was, in fact, a letter to herself, a commitment to never again be just what was expected of her. And thinking about it, she smiled with a lightness she hadn't felt in a long time. After weeks of traveling, she decided it was time to return. But not to return to the same place she had left. It was different now. She wasn't returning as someone overcome by time or longing, but as someone who had finally learned to own her own story. When she got home, the key turned easily in the lock. The living room was as it had been before, clean and quiet, thanks to her neighbor Carol. But something about her had changed so much that the space felt different. It was as if the air carried a new energy, no longer that of heaviness, but that of choice. It wasn't long before David and Laura appeared. They came together, looking reserved, somewhat unsure of how to act. When they entered, she greeted them with a calm smile, without hasty hugs or words to soften what needed to be said. For the first time, they seemed hesitant around her. David was the first to speak. His voice was low, almost guilty. "Mom, we didn't know you were so hurt. I'm so sorry." It was simple, straightforward. Laura looked at the ground, her usual arrogant posture gone. There were no grandiose excuses, just an attempt to finally see her as someone who felt, who dreamed, who had limits. She listened to them in silence, without interrupting. She didn't rush to say everything was fine, because it wasn't. She just calmly replied, "It's not about being hurt. It's about you thinking I didn't need to be there, and about me realizing I need to be in my own life before I can be in yours." David's eyes welled up, but he didn't try to argue. He just nodded, as if he understood that some truths can no longer be swept under the rug. Laura took a deep breath and said, "We want to try again, the right way." And she, without committing herself immediately, simply replied, "We'll see in time." There were no long hugs or empty promises, just a new way of seeing each other. They stayed for a short time, sat at the table, drank tea in silence, and then left. When the door closed, she felt something unexpected. Peace, because finally, she was no longer trying to be accepted. She was simply being who she had always been. Days later, Amelia showed up at the door unannounced. He had a shy smile and an envelope in his hands. It was a drawing of her on the beach, with a yellow scarf in her hair and the sea in the background. In the caption, his granddaughter wrote, "She never came back the same." And that was the point. Seeing this, she felt a lump in her throat, not of sadness, but of recognition. He placed the drawing next to Paul's photo on the living room sideboard. He would understand, she knew. After all, he always reminded her that dreaming has no age limit. He stared at it for a few minutes and then picked up the notebook he had bought in Lisbon. He opened a new page and wrote at the top, "Things I will never apologize for again." He wrote them down one by one, wanting space, wanting more, saying no, leaving in silence, coming back different. And at the end, he wrote in smaller letters, "I was never too old. I just never got asked if I still dreamed." He closed the notebook slowly, as if delicately closing a cycle. Late that afternoon, he sat on the porch with a cup of tea. He felt the wind gently touch his face. For the first time in a long time, I didn't expect a connection. I didn't expect to be called to anything. I no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. Freedom, he discovered, wasn't in the cities he visited, but in the courage to choose. When she looked at Amelia, who was now painting on the porch floor, she realized that this simple act of no longer submitting was already changing something in the next generation. Perhaps her granddaughter would never have to go through the same pain, and that, she thought, was already a silent victory. Later, she took the yellow scarf she had worn in Seville and tied it in her hair. There was no celebration, no special occasion. It was simply a gesture of someone who had learned to take care of herself again. She turned on some soft music, feeling her body sway gently, almost dancing. A belated dance, but full of meaning. And as the sun set, she understood once and for all, it wasn't about punishing anyone, nor about recovering something lost. It was about never letting herself be erased again. Life, after all, always offers a new chance for those brave enough to open the door. And this time, She was ready to enter. What about you? How many times have you stopped dreaming because someone convinced you it was too late? How many times have you placed yourself in the background, waiting to be remembered, while the world moved on without you? This story isn't just hers. It's about all of us who at some point have been treated like extras. But the truth is, there's always time to choose again. There's always a door that can be opened, even after decades of silence. Maybe you don't need to travel to another country or cancel anyone's tickets, but inside you, there's a place waiting to be tended. A dormant dream, a quiet courage, a freedom that can still blossom. So, ask yourself, what would you do if you weren't afraid of disappointing anyone? What would be your first step toward finding yourself again? If this story touched you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. It's never too late to start over, and if you want to continue receiving inspiring stories, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We still have a lot to experience together.